What's up YouTube, it's your boy Corey Lanier here, and today I want to talk to you guys about how to adjust the settings on the Lumix G7 because I got a DM from someone early this morning on Instagram. His name is Tony Savage and he says, "Hey bro, I got the Lumix G7. Your videos have been helping out a lot since I came across your channel. Having some trouble adjusting the settings like yours though, especially the aperture part." So I'm gonna make a quick video real quick to show you guys how easy it is to actually change the settings on your Lumix G7. It's very, very simple. I think one of the main problems that might be your problem, Tony, is that you may not have the camera set to this manual like camera setting, or I think you can also manually adjust your camera settings as well in the M, which is manual. If you have your settings set to something else, anything other than that is kind of like a halfway automatic, halfway manual setting. And it may or may not let you be able to adjust the aperture. For example, if you're on A is the aperture mode or aperture priority mode, and it lets you change your aperture, but everything else in your camera is automatic. So keep that in mind. So anyway, in order to switch your aperture, all you gotta do is make sure you're in the camera setting, and then this little ring right here in the front of the camera right here, this one that I'm moving, that should automatically be set to default to be able to control your aperture. Because when you see on my camera, when I spin this ring in the front, the number should be changing. I can't really see it on your end, but all I'm doing as I move this ring in the front is moving my aperture around. So I want my aperture to be as low as possible so I can let in as much light as possible. So now I'm lowering the number as much as possible. As you can see, I'm letting in more light. It's also kind of still dark in here. I would probably still go to my ISO and bump that up to maybe about 1600. I'm paying attention to this light meter right here, which is, it says it's getting closer to -3, which means it's not that much light in here. 0 is like usually kind of like the perfect number that you want to go for. And the only thing I would adjust in the back is maybe this little ring right here. As you can see, it's like already controlling the light right now. That's the shutter speed. So I'm gonna drop the shutter speed down a little bit to let more light in. But I'm not trying to make this perfect. I'm just showing you guys more about the aperture. So have the aperture as low as possible. Right now, this one is on 3.5. Here's the other thing. How low you can go on the aperture is directly controlled by whatever lens that you're using on your camera. On this lens, I can go as low as 3.5. And it tells you on the very front part of the lens how low your aperture can go on what lens you have. This is the kit lens on the Lumix G7. The kit lens on the Lumix G7, when it's zoomed all the way out to 14 millimeters, the lowest the aperture can go is 3.5. But whenever you zoom in, depending on what millimeter you're at, if you zoom all the way into 42 millimeters, the lowest the aperture can go is 5.6. Basically, all that really says is that it lets in a decent amount of light, and it tries to keep everything in focus at the same time. It's not gonna be a lot of like blurry background stuff. When you start messing with your aperture is really controlling how many things that are in focus, as well as letting in a lot of light or letting in less light. So if the number on your aperture is a high number, you have a lot of things in focus. Pretty much everything can be in focus at one time, but you're probably not gonna have that much light being let into the camera, so you probably will need external lights, like actual lights that you use for video and stuff like that. So a cheat code to be able to let in a lot of light, or let's say you're like trying to shoot with a Lumix G7 at nighttime, would be to get another lens. This lens right here that I'm holding is a 20 millimeter lens, and the aperture of this lens can go down to 1.7 versus a 3.5. So a 1.7 can let in a lot more light than a 3.5, and it blurs the background a lot more as well. So that's why I have a lot of videos on my channel talking about this lens, because whenever you use a prime lens like this, like a 20 millimeter lens or the 25 millimeter lens or 15 millimeter lenses, they all go down to 1.7 on the aperture, meaning you can blur out the background and have different types of focal lengths. Now, another difference between a lens like this and a lens like the one that comes as a kit lens on your G7 is that this lens doesn't zoom in. It stays at 20 millimeters the whole time, which is not a bad thing. You know, if you want to zoom in or zoom out, you just move closer or you move further away from whatever you're taking pictures or video of. But real quick, I want to put this lens on the Lumix G7 so I can show you guys the difference in how it looks as far as how low the aperture can go, and give you an example of like how blurry the background could be. Okay, now my 20 millimeter is now on my Lumix G7. I'm gonna show you how low the aperture can go. So now you guys you see how the aperture is at 3.5. Now when I rotate that ring in the front, it can go down to 1.7. which is now letting in a lot more lights. So I can kind of do more with this lens, but it's not as wide as of a field of view as I had previously. And I'll give you guys an example real quick by video on the Lumix G7. But yeah, guys, that's pretty much it. I mean, adjusting the aperture on the Lumix G7 is pretty simple. There's a dedicated button or ring in the front that specifically, when you rotate, it adjusts the aperture. Just make sure that you're on manual settings and you should have no problem at all. I do plan on maybe one day getting a 15mm lens with the 1.7 aperture, which I think is like by far like the best lens pretty much you can get with the Lumix G7. Or I mean, you can also get some adapters, put some like Canon lenses on here and cheat the system. But as far as like lenses that I've heard of that are just like made for Lumix G7 that you can put on here, I would probably get the 15mm lens at 1.7. I think it's a little expensive, but it should be worth it. I haven't been investing in the Lumix G7 as often. I did upgrade to the Lumix S5, which is the camera I'm shooting this video on right now. And but I still have love for this camera, and also once again, it made this channel that you guys are watching. I'm gonna continue to grow. Finally hit 1,000 subscribers. Thank you guys so much, and I'm gonna keep them coming. Until then, I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.